so I'm giving a lecture today on some points on the mass line. It is from the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. I got my, as you can see, well-worn copy when Josh Sykes flew out here on his own dime from the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. He is the blog master of the Marxist-Leninists, so you should definitely check it out. And if you are interested on where to get some points on the mass line, you can just Google it, and I believe the actual second hit is the Freedom Road Socialist Organization version. So what is Some Points on the Mass Line? Some Points on the Mass Line is a document that was prepared for the Freedom Road Socialist Organization in the 80s, where one of their members sort of codified the way in which they were going to try and work moving forward. So there are several points to the mass line, which is why it's Some Points on the Mass Line. It has a little bit of an introduction. It talks a little bit about society and the ways in which they view society. It talks a little bit about Marxist epistemology, which is Marxist knowledge, how you learn things and how you know things. It talks about methods of work and leadership, which goes on for the majority of the pamphlet, which is actually perhaps the most helpful part of that pamphlet. It then talks about the mass line and the united front work. This is basically how to apply the mass line with other organizations, how to work with the mass line with other organizations. And then it also talks about advance actions, which are ways to sort of, it's somewhat vague, but basically it's just ways to sort of kickstart a movement going. And then of course it also has little handy questions all throughout, and and then just the very last few things is it goes back to Marxist theory of knowledge is embodied in the communist organization. So it's talking about how the FRSO is structured, or how, generally speaking, successful organizations in general are structured that remain broadly democratic. It talks about the mass line and revolution, how this is going to lead to that, and then it just has discussion questions about how to run campaigns in your city. So, starting to begin again at the beginning, what we have in the mass line is roughly, if I did it correctly, 20 points. So it's not by any means a huge text, and you could probably read it in an afternoon very easily. So, what is the mass line? The mass line is the methods used by communists in organizing. Now, it didn't have to be called the mass line. But as a matter of fact, in order to carry out a successful organization, a successful campaign, a successful revolution, what you need to do is you need to have mass line organizing, which is to say that most of your work needs to be focused directly on the masses, directly on the people. Why? Well, the second point of the mass line lays out the very starting point, which is it's the masses that make history. That without the masses, you're not going to have any history made, for better or for worse. I mean, to quote that awful, awful, awful hippie, slogan, what if we threw a war and nobody came? Without the masses either engaged in revolutionary activity, or without the masses engaged in reactionary activity, or without the masses just engaged in normal everyday activity, then society doesn't function. It just doesn't. So the fundamental point is you've got to start with the masses. That is the fundamental root for any mass line organizing. So then the question is, okay, so we have the masses make history. Well, how do the masses make history? Now, the point is the masses don't make the history in any old way. They make history according to certain guidelines. To certain rules, to certain laws. It's pretty simple. If you have the masses and you have a giant economic collapse, what's going to happen? Well, they're going to become radicalized. That's just going to happen. Now, the very fact that this is a principle that happens in an economic collapse and affects the masses in this way doesn't determine, it's not a coarse historical materialism. You can look at Germany. You had an economic collapse in the 20s and 30s. The masses became radicalized, but as we all know, except for the few communists who were very quickly murdered, they didn't become radicalized in a very positive way. right? And they became extraordinarily reactionary because there wasn't a strong communist force to lead them. Now, what happened in, let's say, Russia around 1916? You have a devastating war, you have an economic collapse. Very quickly what happens? The masses, again, given this law, if I can use the term loosely, this rule, this common occurrence, when society begins to crumble, the masses became radicalized. But because there was a strong leading influence there, a strong positive leading influence on the masses, they were able to lead this struggle to the successful revolution of Lenin and the Bolsheviks. So what we need to do is we need to keep in mind, it's not enough just to say, hey, the masses make history as a platitude. A platitude is not a politics. What we also need to do is we need to study the laws, the rules, the general trends in history, or, and it doesn't have to be so esoteric. The general trends in, for example, our union locals in Utah. Who do they support? Where do they vote? Where do they meet? What sort of actions do they take? Same thing with the undocumented workers here. Who are the parties that support them? What kind of actions do they take? What sort of legislation has been passed in regards to them? What are they under attack from? When have they been successful fighting back? So again, it doesn't have to be this grand scope of narrative history, with capital H. It also includes the local rules and guidelines that we face all the time, every day. Right? So it's vitally important that we understand these rules by which our communities are governed and use them to the best advantage. Well, how do we, so what then is the disposition of the masses? Well, the masses have, and this is the fourth point, they have an ideology. And one of the important things to keep in mind is their ideology, which is again their way of thinking, their attitudes, their prejudices, their biases, depend largely. Now this does not make it set. It is not fixed for time and all eternity. But it does depend largely on the total number of social relations that they have experienced. If you grew up in Utah in a conservative Mormon household, where anyone who was not a conservative Mormon was evil or a communist, I wish, and basically, everyone else was vilified. You went to a school that was predominantly Mormon, that shared these sorts of views. All your neighbors were predominantly Mormon, and they also shared these views. And your church was predominantly Mormon, and they also shared these views. This sum totality of your experiences are going to lead you largely to have these views. However, as has happened to many a Mormon, is some teacher or some hippie or some long-haired person hands them a Noam Chomsky book. And they read it and they're like, wow, this is so messed up. Now, I just use Noam Chomsky because he's the predominant example around here. But you'll notice that can often break through ideology. I know that actually one of my favorite Mormons, not to play favorites here, but no, he's one of my favorite Mormons. He actually became radicalized by reading the Communist Manifesto in one of his classes. It was just a partial assigned reading. He was himself very conservative, served a mission, and then he read this. He was always interested in philosophy, and he read this, and suddenly it clicked. Now, the totality of his social relations were such that, he was going to be conservative, and by and large, for most, going back to the rules, you bet on, what people have experienced. But if you keep in mind that ideology, that Mormon or, African or, Mexican ideology or Chicano ideology or whatever people have been exposed to, when you keep that in mind when you go to the people, you're going to have a better idea of how to substantively change things. You're going to understand where the masses are coming from and how to approach them properly. But again, this is also one problem that a lot of ultra-leftists have, is you should recognize that, a lot of their ideology, their way of thinking, their attitudes, is dependent on these totality of social relations, friend, family, work, etc. But that's not it. Even the most conservative working class person, in principle, could be reached. Now, again, you don't necessarily want to, as we'll see later, you don't want to throw your money on that, necessarily, but that's something to keep in mind, that there's no essentiality to it. They're just pragmatic guidelines. Well, so we have these people with their entire totality of social relations and all their experiences. Well, how do you change those? How do you get them to try something new? Well, it's through practice. People learn through practice and experience. You learn through doing. Plenty of homophobic people have ceased to be homophobic when they get a gay friend that they didn't know was gay. Plenty of racist people have ceased to be racist when they end up working with someone who's black, with someone who's Mexican, and that person works hard and is very friendly. Now, I mean, this is not an advocacy for, all we need to do to stop racism is make sure everyone has one black friend. But rather what we need to understand is that when approaching the people, the most important thing we can do is not talk to them, not shove a bunch of books in their hands, not condescend to them, but to be engaged in concrete, practical struggles that they are a part of. I can give you all the statistics on the AFL-CIO website that is drawn from the Department of Labor that tells you will get better money, you will get better benefits, you will be better treated, you'll have better workplace control. I could give all the theoretical arguments about workplace control and the horrors and tyranny of capitalism, but what's going to have more impact than all of that together is bringing one coworker to participate in a union drive. I can talk about all the undocumented workers and actually our solution is just go to our what sort of solutions we have, Amnesty Now. But the best way I can get people on the side of the undocumented workers is to get them to talk to the undocumented workers. And then when they go, then we should talk to our legislature, then take them to the legislature and show them that nothing is going to ever be done there. I can tell them, these are a bunch of corrupt politicians. They don't care about you, they don't care about your community, and they certainly don't care about the undocumented workers. But what I actually need to do is I need to take them, show them, they have had this experience, they want to help, take them to those politicians and show them, no, as a matter of fact, they don't care. Because that practice is worth all the words in the world, or at least most of the words in the world. And we'll see that words become very important here in point 10. So we're learning from experience. Well, how do we learn? How do we best capitalize on this experience? One of the ways is, and this is the point, is that the general resides in the particular. Now, this seems pretty abstract, but if you think about it, there's a general system of capitalism, let's say. Okay, so where is capitalism? It's not a spirit, it's not a ghost, it's, it's not haunting us, as long as we don't want to be too Deleuzian about it, or Derridian, rather. But rather, it's all caught up in concrete relations, right? The army doesn't exist because there is a giant army spirit that unifies everything. The army exists in concrete soldiers, wearing concrete uniforms, taking concrete actions, shooting concrete civilians, being transported by concrete, not literally concrete, but actual vehicles, actual buildings, actual orders, actual money being exchanged between them and private contractors. And so the United States Army is the general, but it exists in all of these concrete particulars, not just a soldier, but also what that soldier does. When a soldier is in the Philippines working as a military contractor to undermine the people's movement there, not just the soldier himself, but also that very act of undermining that people's movement is also the United States Army. Well, we should always keep this in mind. If we want to teach people about the evils of capitalism, it's not enough to show them the abstract stock market. What we need to show them is at your work, you work really hard, do all the work, and you get none of the money. You can't make it from paycheck to paycheck. Or you don't get the respect of, maybe you have a great supervisor, but my guess is you probably don't have a great district manager. Or maybe you have a great district manager, but odds are you get rules down from corporate that are terrible, right? And so what you do is you drive this home, these particular points of alienation, of exploitation, these particular things that you are constantly suffering, constantly undergoing, and you make that particular into general. Now, it's important that you link them both. If you just have the general, it's going to be abstract. You aren't going to be someone who actually is engaged in anyone's concrete struggle, to become legalized, to become unionized, to cease to be murdered by imperialism, right? You're just someone spouting theory, jargon, whatever. But also, and this is really important, you can't just do it on the particular either. If you alleviate this particular issue or that particular issue, if it's not linked to a wider struggle, it's not going to matter. If we stop Sandstrom from passing his SB 1070 Light, which is a very racist, anti-immigrant bill that we have here coming to Utah, if we don't link that to a wider struggle of fighting for undocumented workers here in Utah, it's not going to matter. So it's very important, I can't stress this enough, to link the particular with the general. So this is, again, going along with it. How do we do that? Struggle. People learn through struggle. This is one of the key points of the mass line, is to get together a concrete struggle that people participate in, that people fight in, and through that struggle, they begin to learn about the particulars, this particular racist group, that particular racist senator, and then the general, a wider system of colonialism and oppression that is not just a few bad apples, but rather systemic. And the longer and the more deeply they begin to fight against that, the more they'll realize the wider implications. So, how do we get people involved in the struggle? You've got to go to where the people are at. People here are at school, and they're people who are just trying to make it, get through school, pay their bills, and get out without too many student loans. Well, that's where you start. You start with chop from the top, fight back against cuts for education. Now, if we were in France in, let's say, April of '68, where would the people be at? This is a corrupt capitalist system, and it needs to be overthrown. And where you are there is not, chop from the top or no more cutbacks. It's occupy, the universities, fight against de Gaulle, and workers and students unite, right? And just revolution. But you've got to start from where the people are. And keep in mind, there's a lot of different groups, depending on what struggle you're looking at. Whether it's education, it's going to be the students. When it's undocumented workers, it's going to be the undocumented workers themselves, along with the sympathetic activists, right? If you're looking at a union, it's going to be the angry employees, and it's also going to be the more class-conscious employees. And for every struggle, there's going to be a place where people are at, and it's your job to be there. So, once we start from where the people are at, what do we do with that? Well, this is where Mao comes in, from the masses to the masses. All the people, everybody has ideas about something, right? We have ideas about unions, we have ideas about immigrants, we have ideas about schools, we have ideas about churches. But for the most part, they're not systematic. They're just like, oh, some black guy was mean to me at one point, or oh, I had a bad boss at one point. And so it's a fragmentary, sort of incoherent ideology. It's our job to go to the masses, get their ideas, get what they are really facing, get what they are really fighting, bring it to us to clarify and systematize so that it's clear exactly what's going on, rather than these little fragments about an occasional bad principal or occasional bad administrator, and turn it into a systemic critique where we cover why that principal acts in that way, why that administrator acts in that way, why these senators want to criminalize undocumented labor and talk about borders but are willing to pass NAFTA. So we take these ideas and then we bring them back to the people. Now, again, I've been talking a lot about theory, but we also need to talk about the way to fight back. It's not enough just to bring ideas in the sense of, oh, well, here's the explanation. You also need to bring ideas like, here's who we can count on, here's how we can fight back, and here's what we should do. Here's our method. Now, what happens is when you return that method to the people, once they start using it on their own, then you've actually returned it to the masses. It's not enough just to tell the masses what's going on. It's important that they understand that analysis, and they begin to do that analysis itself. And soon enough, these weapons, because analysis, understanding, education are weapons, become into the hands of the masses, and they adopt them as their own. If the masses don't adopt your tools as their own, it means you must have done something wrong. Because the masses will fight back if you bring them, a proper analysis, a proper method, a mode of action. So that's what we do from the masses to the masses. Now, one of the important things in this is also the struggle for summation. Basically, you're going to have fights. You're going to have a lot of fights. And on each fight, what's going to happen is someone is going to want to sum up, draw a conclusion from it. Now, here's the thing. Unfortunately, in our situation, here in the United States, almost all of the conclusions that they will want to draw will be negative, and they will want to draw them to hurt the people. Now, some people do this honestly. They just don't really know what's going on. Some people are actively working to destroy us. A good example is, again, immigration. One thing to note, right? For example, we're struggling against crime and undocumented workers, ostensibly. One thing happens is a report that comes out, and the report says that, in fact, cities with massive amounts of undocumented immigration actually have a lower crime rate. Now, what's the summation that we should be drawing? The summation that we should be drawing is, look, these are people who are not a bunch of criminals. These are people who want to participate in the community. But, reactionaries and racists, what do they want to say? Even though there's, very little evidence to support this, or it's sketchy at best, what they want to say is, well, that's because they don't report crime. Right? And so it's our job to fight against that summation. How do we fight against that summation? Well, if that's the real issue, then why are you making it harder for them to talk to police by further criminalizing them? Right? That's one of the ways that you fight for summation. You show that the other summation is not a good faith summation. They're not trying to draw honest conclusions from the evidence. What they're trying to do is, again, attack the people. This is another thing. For example, unions have this problem a lot. If there's a corrupt union boss, what's the immediate summation that is drawn in America? Well, we all know unions don't work. There's another summation that we should be drawing, which is we have to have a radical rank and file. We have to have people at the local level who are willing to vote out any corrupt union boss. And this is another summation to have, is that people in the union need to be awake and aware and fighting and keeping track of what's actually going on. Both of those conclusions can be drawn from the experience. And so it's absolutely vital that we draw the proper conclusions from the experience that are going to help move the fight forward. Because if we don't, the enemy will, and they will use those conclusions to disorient the people. And one of the good ways you can just look at it is undocumented workers. The conclusion that has constantly been drawn is that they're just here for benefits, and so the working class is completely disoriented when it comes to undocumented workers, and we don't have a positive general line in the United States, and the reactionaries are gaining ground. So it's on us to fight hard to draw those sorts of conclusions. So part 11 is going to be the campaign methods. So pretty simply, this is a variation of Mao's protracted war. Now, the point is this: we're not going to win a single we're not going to win an immigrant or undocumented workers' rights campaign in a single battle, let alone bring down capitalism in a single battle, right? Even just to stop one piece of legislation, we're going to have a rally. We're going to have protests. We're going to have to get out information. We're going to have to reach out to the working class. And each one of those steps is a new fight. And so one of the methods of campaign we need to keep in mind is this is going to be a long fight. We need to remain aware that this struggle is going to keep going forward and forward. And we need to, again, as Marx would say, the communists are not separate from the working class, but rather the most advanced elements that are always considering the future. Right? That's what we need to do, is not just look at the next protest, or not just look at the next time we are passing out information. We need to look at the next struggle, and the next one after that, and the one after that, and the one after that, to the ultimate goal, and plot a course, of course changing it as situation dictates, to get to that point. So, what we should also be aware of in this campaign is general calls and particular guidance. So what is a general call? A general call is the widest possible call you can bring in to the movement, to bring as many people in. And I love this example. It's my favorite example. Vietnam. One of the things, or let's go with Iraq. Iraq is, support our troops, bring our boys home. Well, here's the thing. When they're in Iraq, shooting people, like I'm not criticizing them at qua working class. I'm not criticizing them qua using violence. But when they are in Iraq, imperializing it, murdering Iraqis for the sake of capitalists and oil industrialists and defense contractor spending, they're not my troops. Okay? They're not my troops. I don't have a national chauvinism, that is to say, overarching preference towards them, just because they happen to be born or are fighting for the same place that I happen to be born or am living. So what we need is an even further general call. And one of the best general calls is troops out now, right? Because that can include everyone from support our troops, bring them home, and I love the Vietnam example, support our troops, bring them home, or support our troops fighting in Vietnam, victory to the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army, right? Everywhere in between would fall within that general call. And that's something that we need to keep aware of. But then also what we need to do is we need to exercise particular guidance. For those of you who have been engaged in any of the most recent struggles that we've had, that's one of the biggest issues just in organizing. Yeah, we are really good at making these general calls. Stop imperialism, stop criminalizing undocumented workers. But also we need particular guidance. Okay, so who's going to make the signs? Who's going to show up here? Who's going to be greeting? Who's going to be leading the chant? What sort of slogans are we going to use? What sort of message do we want? And that is something that you also need to be aware of. It's not just enough, again, I said this before and I'll say it again, a platitude is not politics. A general call by itself is going to wash itself out, and just particular guidance without a wider call is going to become this insular, self-contained unit that doesn't really do anything. Look at any protesting group that doesn't have mass popular support that has been around for 3 or 4 years. 10, maybe 20 activists show up all the time to their own little protest, feel very good about themselves, and they don't do anything. It's because they don't have a general call. A good example is, you just have to look at footage from most of the big protests. And what do you see? Stop the war in Iraq, to stop global warming, to protect LGBT rights and undocumented workers. All of those issues are important. But you'll notice that's not a general call. That's an incredibly narrow and specific call for everyone who has exactly those beliefs. So again, you can't just have the particular guidance. You can't just have the general call. Again, they need to be united, just as our experience is the particular united with the general. The next issue they talk about is the advanced, the intermediate, and the backwards. So the backward are, let's start with the advanced. The advanced are the most active, the most energetic, the most knowledgeable, the ones who are willing to do the hard work of actually organizing. And they have the right view on it, that we shouldn't criminalize undocumented workers. Now, they may have individual idiosyncratic views, but they're, generally progressive. The intermediate are going to be a range. Those closest to the advanced will be like, we need to protect undocumented workers. What's happening to them is really messed up, so we should be pretty careful. We got to stop this, and it's racist. But they're not necessarily willing to take that next step into full-on activism. And then on the other end of the intermediate, are going to be like, well, somebody has to do something about immigration. Our communities are disintegrating. I don't know what the solution is, but somebody's got to do something. You'll notice how that has tinges of racism, tinges of nationalism, but it's still intermediate because it's not clear and it could go either way. Well, what the advanced need to do is, again, reach out to the advanced need to reach out to the intermediate and mobilize them. And finally, of course, we have the backward. And there's a lot of different ways to be backward. I'll just give 2 examples, again, on undocumented workers. One is to just be like a Minuteman, right? Or Sandstrom, and just be blatantly, openly racist and call for their deportation or the seizure of their property and, seizure of their property, putting them in a concentration camp, and then deporting them. By the way, that's Jason Chaffetz. That's his view on what should be done about undocumented workers. He is clearly part of the backward. Okay, so, but there's other parts of the backward, and these are the parts that are more difficult to deal with and are more unpleasant to deal with, which are those who say, no, well, what we have to do to protect undocumented workers is we have to get the Democrats really going. We got to support the Democrats. If we just write enough letters to the Democrats, they'll help us out. Now, what you'll notice is this isn't backward in that they're saying racist, terrible things, but it's backwards in that if you try this strategy, it is going to fail and you are going to lose and you are going to waste everybody's time and probably do a really good job of disillusioning the advanced. Right? So the backward are not just those who advocate reactionary views, but also those who advocate harmful or reactionary methods. So what should the goal be in mass line work? We need to unite the advance in a common cause. So again, we actually had a leadership training earlier, going off, giving speeches on the quotations of Mao Zedong, and some of that was, like uniting the advance for him at that time meant winning people over to Marxism, Leninism, or smashing reactionaries or not giving up the struggle. And of course, we should all do all those things right now. But that was the key contradictory issue. Do we support Marxism, Leninism, or social democracy? Right? The advance need to be united around, in this case, Marxism, Leninism. And that's a pretty abstract idea. But there are also concrete ways to unite the advance. Do we have a silent protest? Or do we have a chanting protest? Right? In this case, depending on the instance, it's probably better, you can unite the advance around a chanting protest. Do we have a union drive secretly, or do we have an open and public union drive all over, the shop? Well, you should unite the advance towards a secret union drive, right? Because you don't want to get everyone fired. I mean, these are the sorts of concrete things that you can unite the advance around. Now, they don't even have to be Marxist-Leninists. They don't have to subscribe to the mass line. It's just your job to unite the most advanced, for in whatever extent they are advanced, towards the proper policy. So, you do that. This advance then mobilizes the workers. It takes the movement to the workers, gets them up and going and excited and mobilized about it, winning them even more to the advance, and then also isolating the backward. If they have reactionary ideology, their ideology is either changed or completely marginalized, and they're viewed as a pariah to say such horrible racist things. Or their bad methods are completely ignored and people don't use them anymore. So I mean, these are the basic categories. Now here's the thing, is it's important to focus on the advance because those are the ones who are going to be carrying out the actions. Now the intermediate, you can win the intermediate to the advance, but again, you'll notice that the best way to do that is through struggle. The best way to do that is to have the advance lead the intermediate into a struggle for equal rights, for a union drive, whatever. Whereas, if you just focus on the intermediate, often the advanced will just go to waste because what are they doing? Yeah, they're talking to people, but are they getting them concretely involved in the actual struggles? No, not necessarily. And then, that's a bad method to go with. Now, what happens if you focus on the backward? Now, again, there are conservative construction workers that can be won over. There are Tea Party members that when you lay it out to them, they will realize what's going on and they're wrong. There are libertarians who will give up free market capitalism. But it's a question of pragmatism. Is that where you should be spending your resources? While you are engaged in dialogue with or attempting to win over the backward, either one, their methods or views are still getting adopted and propagated. Two, your advance is sitting around doing nothing or just wasting time arguing with them. And three, the intermediate is going to be disoriented because it looks as though you have two equal parties, and each view could equally be correct because all they're doing is arguing with each other. I table quite frequently with the RSU, especially over this last year, and there's a really good rule that I follow. I'm willing to talk to anyone because again, it's tabling, it's just agitation at that point. I'm willing to talk to anyone for as long as necessary or as long as they want to talk, with one caveat. They're not an actual literal capitalist that owns a business. I've made this mistake before, but there's no point in talking to someone who owns a business at this point about the virtues of them giving up their business for their workers to run. Now, could I win over some of them? Yes. Have I in fact won over some of them? Yes. But also, is that the best use of one's time? No, it's clearly not. The best use of your time is to lead the advance in a struggle, bring along the masses, or the majority of the intermediate, so that the intermediate begin to learn and join the advance. So, there's the advance, intermediate, and backwards. So what are the tasks and methods? Again, just restating, this is concretely, unite the advance, mobilize the intermediate, and isolate the backward. And again, this is one consideration, this is the next point, is to lose the advance is a disaster. If you lose the advance, you are going to lose your ability to move forward in the struggle. And again, what's the easiest way to lose the advance? Stop being engaged in concrete struggles. If you want people to get indifferent, to stop caring, to stop doing things, the best thing you can do is either engage in terrible policies or just do nothing. So again, it's very important that we always be engaged in a concrete struggle, whether on our school, in our community, at our workplace, all the time. And always, again, be pushing these advance. So, what do we do with other organizations? And in this case, the mass line says, unite all who can be united to fight the enemy. Now, I don't have to agree with the Democrats. And that's good, because I don't. But if there are Democrats who are willing to help fight for EFCA, if there are Democrats who are willing to fight for undocumented workers, then I need to have a mass line that is open enough that they can be united in this fight. And again, it just goes back to the Vietnam. Troops out now is a slogan that can unite all that want to stop the Vietnam War, right? Legalize now is maybe not. Now that might be the right slogan for the advance, and maybe the advance should carry that slogan forward. But the widest again, line is going to be, don't criminalize our communities, right? Because that's something that even Democrats who are kind of uncomfortable with all these immigrants coming in. Well, yeah, okay, it's messed up, but it's probably unconstitutional, so I'm not going to support it, right? You can get those people who are lukewarm or are not certain or are, again, the more backward of the intermediate on your side. So it's really important to unite all who can be united to fight the enemy. But again, keep in mind that there are a lot of opportunists who are just trying to exploit a real living struggle. You can see this, I don't hate to use them. The Democrats are a really good example. Democrats will jump on any issue they think that will get them votes, and as soon as they have gotten those votes and a job, they will dump that issue and never vote again on it. If you have any questions, Barack Obama promised to have us out of Iraq in 11 months. How's that working out for us? Again, so in this case, many of the people who united, and this is an important distinction, united with the Democrats who said, support Barack Obama, support him, right, now have basically been completely disoriented. Because they said, yeah, support Barack Obama because he's this historical figure. That then leads to slogans which are like, wait, what's going on here? I thought he was a historical figure. He's still bailing out. He's still allowing BP to exist and gush, crude oil all over everything. And he's still including our imperialist wars in both Afghanistan, Iraq, Philippines, Colombia, right? And so that will disorient them. Whereas what you can do is you can even have a wider line, which is unite to fight the fascist right, in which the Democrats can participate or not participate. But the important thing then is that the working class aren't disoriented through your line, right? That you're not like waffling back and forth. And if the Democrats want to participate in that, that's fine. But also they need to be isolated. And the reason why they need to be isolated is because they should not be allowed to co-opt the actual struggle going on for their own, votes, essentially. So, additionally, now we'll move on to the role of advance actions. Now, it'd be great if we had just some preset plan where what you do is you flyer a neighborhood and then you hold a rally and then you have an occupation or a sit-in. It's not that simple. These are, again, guiding principles. What you need to do, though, to recognize is that the advance can also radically alter the very conditions and discourse that are going on. Again, not to be too presumptuous, but one of the ways that has happened recently is there was a protest at the Patrick Henry Caucus, which generated a lot of publicity on the issue of immigrant rights, and also on the issue of specifically Stephen Sandstrom and the Patrick Henry Caucus, which then allowed for further mobilization against, or a further rally in a united front for undocumented workers, and then out of that, building a coalition to directly protest Stephen Sandstrom, and in fact having now a really wide connection to the masses vis-a-vis the media, and vis-a-vis them understanding that we're out there fighting for undocumented workers. And now we have a whole host of different connections to undocumented workers themselves, people who organize with them, community organizers interested in everything from undocumented worker orientation programs to police brutality prevention programs. And so what you'll notice is sometimes the advance can take actions that will bring favorable conditions. But again, you have to do that always with a thought to where the masses are going to be and how you can best bring them on board through your advance action. So, another thing to keep in mind is that objective conditions we are dealing with is not static. And I can't stress this enough. You should never read either this pamphlet, because again, it's just a pamphlet, some points on the mass line, or Marx, or Lenin, or Mao, and understand them dogmatically, which is to say that everything that they've written is scripture and it should all be followed out in every single way, to the letter, in the exact same way they said. These are just general principles, and you always need to keep in mind when conditions change. For example, police brutality, that as an issue had a lot less traction before the murder of Oscar Grant. So if you keep approaching it from that same strategy of slowly building a cop watch to wide-scale protests, wide-scale publication of this, wide-scale police resistance, then you're failing, because you always need to keep in mind the static that conditions are not static. So, how then should an organization operate? The way in which they think operates best, and the way in which I think it operates best, is by the principles of democratic centralism. You have the democracy, everybody has a say, everybody has a vote, to whatever level's appropriate. Obviously, a local union should not be determining what the national union does by itself, but rather it should be, voting along with other unions. But roughly speaking, all things considered, it should be as democratic as it possibly can be. Everybody has a say, everybody argues for their position, but then a decision is made. And this decision is the part that is centralism. The decision is made, and then you go with that decision. And there's a lot of reasons why you should do that. One of which is if you're working at cross purposes, it becomes a mess. Things that need to get done don't get done. But then also, if you start having success, you don't know what your actual success is for, or what is causing that success. Because your success could be from either the policy that won or the policy that didn't win, if both of them are being carried out. If you are failing, you don't know if the reason why you're failing is because of the policy that won or the policy that didn't win. So in this case, the centralism is important because it also allows you to sum up your failures. It allows you to learn from mistakes. Whereas if you don't, and you just say everybody do whatever you want, you'll never be able to actually understand what is going on that's successful and what is going on that's a failure. So, finally this brings us to the wider point, which is the mass line in revolution. And how does the mass line lead to revolution? Well, in this case, it's very much how Lenin said. There's three things that need to happen. The people cannot live in the old way. You can't go to your job in the same way. You can't relate to the stock market in the same way. You can't buy your commodities in the same way. We can't live in the same way. The ruling class cannot rule in the same way. They cannot rule it through corporate capitalism. They cannot rule it by fiat. They cannot rule it through their guns and their tanks. And they can't rule it by being rich enough to buy elections, right? And this is the very essence of changing the way the ruling class runs from a ruling class of the rich and the bosses to a ruling class of the workers, or the proletariat if you want to get technical. And then finally, there must be a strong revolutionary organization. This revolutionary organization, needs to be able to bring that together to make these conditions change. The workers are going to continue to live in the same way unless they are able to unite and fight to change the way they live. The ruling class is going to be able to continue to rule in the same way unless we can strongly organize a revolutionary organization to resist them ruling in the same way. Now, there's actually something else that the FRSO puts out, which I don't actually think is in this pamphlet, which is odd, but it's actually really good. So just a final thought on this is when you're considering your organization, you should be doing three things. You should win as much as you can for the people. You should do as much damage as you can to the enemy. And then you should win the advance to revolutionary organization and, of course, the revolutionary ideology. The revolutionary ideology they push, which I think is correct, is Marxism, Leninism, but you can insert your blank however. If you just win all you can from the people, they can take it away. If you don't believe me, look at the civil rights movements, especially given undocumented workers. They had a guest worker program. It was called Braceros. And basically, it was modern legalized slavery. It wasn't the capitalists that got rid of that program. It was the fight of Latinos and Chicanos to get that removed. Now you hear about guest worker programs everywhere and them coming back. Okay, they won something for their people, but they didn't do as much damage as they could to the enemy. So now the enemy is recouped. And now the capitalists in this country are strong enough to basically reinstitute the same racist policies we had 50 years ago. So it's absolutely vital that you not just win all you can for the people, but also, deprive the enemy of as much as you can. And then finally, you need to win the advance to revolutionary ideology, because if you don't, the inertia will quickly take them. Which is to say, once they win that immediate battle, that'll be it. They'll be done. They won't have to worry about it anymore because ostensibly they got what they want. And they won't realize that this is, in fact, a wider struggle, not against an individually bad person or an individual bad policy, but against an entire global system of oppression. So there you go. There's some points on the mass line, and I will we can break into groups, or if people just want to ask questions, I'm open to whatever everyone wants to do.
Good man.
So, okay, so we decided just to ask questions. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
I just have one. Concerning the backwards, so I'm getting to clarify, there are two main groups, the ones that actively work against the movement, and the ones who might be sympathetic towards the movement or agree with the movement, but their actions are counterproductive to the movement. Are these, qualified the same way? Are they both still considered backwards, or are there different routes to take with them?
Of course, you always should keep in mind the contradiction between the advance and the backward, right. And you always want to correctly handle the contradictions between them. So yeah, I mean, there is a little bit of a difference between someone who has bad methods and someone who is ill-intentioned and wants to destroy the movement. But here's the thing. What you should also recognize is, concretely speaking, in the struggle, they are both damaging and they are both backwards.
So that's why, even though someone who is hostile towards the movement and someone who's sympathetic to the movement, but their methods are flawed, they're both classified the same as backwards, even though one is sympathetic and one is hostile.
Exactly. I mean, and it's important to keep in mind that the advanced, intermediate, and backward are not the same terms in different struggles. So someone who is the leading advance, right, of the Catholic Church, who is fighting out there every day for undocumented workers, might be part of the most backward group when it comes to sexual and gender rights, and sexual and gender equality, right? So it's important to note that advance and backward aren't universal characteristics that apply in all instances to all people. And even throughout a struggle, people might change from backward to advance or advance from backward. So that, someone who is really advanced and radical in calling a strike is really backward when it comes to what demands to actually make, right? So you've always got to keep this in mind. But yeah, again, the important thing is you shouldn't let the sympathy that you have for people who are supportive of the movement let them destroy the movement. Because this is what frequently happens. You can look at it for the Weather Underground. The Weather Underground destroyed the Students for a Democratic Society by being ultra-left, by essentially saying, okay, now what we need to do is we all need to get out there with bats and bricks and break things. Well, maybe, but I think the SDS probably could have done more had it remained radical and a radical voice for students, instead of splitting and fragmenting into a million different groups, right? So concretely, whether you were, a John Bircher who wanted to see the SDS destroyed because they're all a bunch of godless communists, or whether you're the Weather Underground, your actions and your net effect is to destroy the SDS, and that's something that we need to be aware of. Put it bluntly and clichédly, quite often the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And we should be aware of this, and we should not allow those who would intentionally or unintentionally destroy our struggle to do so. Any additional?
I would just say real quick that just in terms of doing the immigration stuff, these things are super helpful. So it's just really kind of like pragmatic advice about how to move forward. And the more we do the immigration stuff, and the more I think about these things, the more it comes in handy, I think.
Yeah, well, and if you'll allow me to interject, would you say then that you learned best through concrete struggle and concrete experience of that struggle?
Sure. But it's just that, reading a pamphlet is one thing, but then as you're experiencing it, that's where you see how it can be applied. And so, yeah.
All right. From the masses, experience, into something systematized, back to the masses. All right, well, if there's nothing else, I guess we will call this a close.
Okay.